All right. Apologies for the delay, but we'll go ahead and get started. Not that we need a quorum to meet, but we obviously only have Amber and myself tonight. So Amber will be generously providing an update on the planning and zoning meeting from last week. And then hopefully those of you who were not able to attend tonight can go ahead and review the recording, and we will just go from there. So,
would it be helpful for me to share my screen with the document that I created?
absolutely, yes, that would be great.
Okay, so I think it needs to be enabled for me.
Let's see. Oh, yep, you're right. All panelists. I think I just successfully changed it. Try again.
Yes. Okay. Just a sec.
Oh, and we do have an attendee. Charlie joined us. Hello, Charlie. Actually, Amber, if you don't mind, I'm gonna see if I can elevate Charlie to a panelist so that he is allowed to join and the conversation. All right, Charlie, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hey, look at you. I haven't seen you in a long time.
It's been a minute.
So, very last minute email. Luckily Charlie was able to join us. So, unfortunately, when I sent you that email, I didn't realize that 2/3, 3/4 of our committee was not going to be here tonight. So, it's pretty much just Amber and myself at this point. So, and now you. So it may be a more interesting conversation with your input instead of just Amber and I talking to each other.
So given that, should we start from the real estate perspective versus from the Planning and Zoning Commission perspective? Should we plan to restructure how we explore this?
I would say, Charlie, again, thank you for your input to this point. I did share the article that you just sent me with the rest of the committee. And so, I don't know if you're prepared to speak, if you just want to talk off the cuff, or if you kind of want to listen in for a few minutes, up to you, totally.
Actually, would love to kind of start with planning and zoning just to kind of hear what the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Sounds good, thanks.
Then I will go ahead and share this. Everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah, zoom in a little bit to make that text bigger. So we probably devoted a good 45 minutes to this conversation, specifically around ADUs. Anthony had shared the existing code with his sort of markup, his isolation of different sections that referred to accessory dwelling units or to dwelling units, just to draw our attention to those areas. And Sandy, I believe he had already shared that with you, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. So we really just went through high level initial gut responses and feedback that commission members had regarding the concept of approving ADUs. So chiefly it was, what are the parameters and what is the process? So what regulations do we need to create to sort of to govern the physical space itself? And then what process do we need to go through as a commission, either just planning and zoning or design and review board, to be aware of projects, to approve projects, to require permitting and conditional use permits on those particular projects. So it was a pretty wide ranging. We did obviously go down on some tangents around utilities and impacts on parking and things of that nature. But I'll just sort of read through these very high level notes so that we can all be aware of what the primary ones, and I sort of distilled down from that wide ranging conversation. So yeah, front and center was, what would the process be to review and approve new accessory dwelling units? Would it be a design process? Would there be restrictions and parameters on the design of these structures, the cosmetic design of them? Should they also go through a conditional use permit process, which would allow community voice in kind of weighing in on these projects, but would also allow us as a commission to kind of review these and understand what the volume is initially, and whether or not that would impact the city's work and our work in permitting these. We just wanted to note also that the current application fee is $430 if that's a consideration we need to make in terms of accessibility and equity. There was a lot of conversation around whether or not we should require that the primary residence be owner occupied. Obviously, there's concern on the commission around real estate speculation, investors coming in and buying up properties in order to convert the properties to potentially multifamily dwellings. Obviously, this isn't that, and we need to be very clear in any language that we create, and also any conversation we have with community members, that this isn't about rezoning individual parcels, but that conversation around owner occupancy for the ADU parcel itself, I think there was consensus that it should be owner occupied, and we'll kind of see how it goes from there. There was some conversation around lending and whether or not that would be a barrier for loans from banks if we had that requirement. And none of us on the commission knew anything about that. So maybe Charlie, you can give us some information, and I haven't had an opportunity to really look into that. We talked quite a bit about a limit on ADUs per parcel. The thought was, given our typical lot size here in Maplewood, one should be the limit. Obviously, we need to specify that it should be detached, because we didn't want to get into any, again, multifamily dwellings. If it's an attached ADU, that really gets quite murky. And I think, Charlie, the article that you shared specifically referred to it as a DADU. So that's good language for us to incorporate and thinking about. We talked a little bit about whether or not there should be a minimum for off-street parking spaces related to this. Again, that would be part of the conditional use permit process. I think that there were some mixed feelings about that. Obviously, a lot of other cities are looking to decrease their parking minimums as a way to sort of increase density and lower barriers to this kind of activity. So I think that's something that could warrant further conversation, and it may also be something that is reviewed on a case-by-case basis, given that we have some streets that allow parking on both sides and some that limit it to a single side, some that have alleys, some that don't. Yeah, I think that's a question of how sort of customized this becomes for the petitioner. There was some conversation around whether or not garage conversions would be allowed. I think that the commission felt like, yes, this makes a lot of sense since there are existing garages. Why put people through the process of having to tear down a structure only to rebuild it in the same spot? With that, there was some discussion about height and bulk limits. For instance, on my street here on Cambridge, we have somebody building a garage with a unit above it. And the height of that exceeds the height of their home. So whether or not we should explore any kind of requirements on height and bulk, if it's a garage conversion specifically. There was some conversation about the style of the ADU matching the style of the primary dwelling unit. The commissioner, who is an architect, recommended that we not make that a requirement. But Anthony did mention that there are some existing ordinances that require in certain zones where there are predominantly brick houses that new structures be brick. That was not something that we've spent a lot of time talking about on planning and zoning. So I think we need to look a little bit more into that and whether we would need to adjust some of that language in order to allow non-brick ADUs to be built in what Anthony called brick zones. There was a lot of conversation about square foot minimum and maximum. We didn't have anything at our fingertips to really reference in that. So I think that that's something for further study and looking at best practices in other cities. We also discussed whether the minimum should be per occupant. Our sense was no, because as we're looking at the zoning ordinances and sort of looking at what we define as a family and looking at some of those general definitions, that we really didn't want to impose further burdens on people. If you have two people who want to live in a 600 square foot dwelling, you have three people, two people and a baby who want to squeeze into a 600 square foot dwelling. Perhaps that should be up to their discretion, but I think that was something that we wanted to explore a little bit further. In discussing the maximum for square footage, there were a lot of questions about bulk requirements and how that sort of would align with setback requirements. The sense was that we probably already have limits within the current code about how much green space is required per parcel and what the setbacks are, that you really couldn't get an ADU to be close to the size of the primary dwelling. But I think, again, we need to go through and look at what the actual situation is by parcel, because I don't think we had a good sense off the top of our head, like how the best way to make sure that the ADU was not equivalent size or larger than the primary dwelling on the parcel. And then it also came forward from one of our commission members, the question of whether or not we should ban simultaneous construction of the primary residence and the ADU. I don't know that we really got to why we would do that, just that there have been some cities that have chosen to do that as a way to sort of keep property costs from rising too quickly. When you've got two new constructions on the same parcel, potentially you are making too many things too nice at once. It was a little unclear what the motivation was for that. And again, I haven't had time to take a look at what he was referencing. But we had discussed that Portland's been held up as a good example of sort of how to allow ADUs while trying to minimize gentrification. But there are probably others that we can add to this list to take a look at. So that was, in essence, at a high level, where most of the comments and questions were bucketed. We did talk about safety and fire code and utilities. Anthony reassured us that our existing ordinances really cover everything that we need to have covered in that regard, even if we're putting in additional utilities and specifically plumbing into ADUs, that the current requirements would suffice for what we would be doing in that area. So that's where we are. And then it did end up with the recommendation that committee members come and join us at the next Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. It looks like if we do have any new business, it will be fairly limited. So the bulk of the conversation can be turned over to kind of continuing down this path and sort of sharing information and sort of getting to some agreement on where we think we need to move forward.
Great. So just to, I guess the gist of the commission members is that they're overall in favor of allowing, and just as long as we sort of control the process, either via conditional use or, writing in some of these concerns into the ordinances.
Yes, there was unanimous agreement that we should move forward with this. And I think the idea of control was one that we wanted to approach very thoughtfully. We don't want to relax certain regulations in order to impose new ones that might make this process onerous. So really thinking through this process as a way to reform and deregulate in a sensible way that allows, sort of the outcome that we're hoping to achieve, which is greater affordability and greater density.
Cool. Very cool. So Charlie, actually, Amber, do you mind continuing to share just so we
can sure. Yeah. Sorry.
In case we want to reference any of those comments. So since Charlie doesn't have the advantage of seeing it on his tablet like I have in front of me. So, Charlie, any just random thoughts at this point?
You bet. Charlie Hinderletter, I live on Folk Avenue in Maplewood, but I'm also the Director of Government Affairs for St. Louis Realtors. So I know a lot about a little bit about a lot of things, and I bring my members along to a lot of things to help me understand things better. But I love the conversation that you guys have kicked off with this. I think ADUs are a fantastic um, option to allow for folks for a variety of different reasons. It's one where we have this issue of a missing middle, where you don't have um, a lot of that density and a lot of that um, variety of housing stock that we need. Our national association thinks that over the last 20 years, we probably have underbuilt housing to the tune of 5.5 to 6.5 million units. And we're seeing that now with anybody that's tried to buy a home. Our members just don't have the inventory out there to sell. We've got more realtors than we do homes for sale in our area. And that's true nationally too. I think this is phenomenal because it gives more options for those homeowners, for those folks that want to have more flexibility with their property. But to Amber's point, it also allows for that greater density. And I think Maplewood's a great place for that. Parking requirements are always going to be a part of that conversation, but we also have 2 Metrolink stations in Maplewood. We're exceptionally fortunate in that regard. And I think this suits that well. We're dealing with an affordability issue nationwide. St. Louis, we're fortunate. By our National Association statistics, we're the 7th most affordable housing market in the 100 largest metro regions in the country. That doesn't mean we don't still have an affordability problem, though. And this is just a little piece that I think is helpful to be able to broaden that range of options to make sure that people have access to affordable housing. And frankly, just more variety and more different types. I've got a friend that would love to live in a tiny home, and while that's not for me, having that opportunity for somebody actually that lives in Maplewood would be fantastic. So I love the fact that you guys are having this conversation. Health and safety is critical, so making sure that if we do this, it's got to be done well. How you guys are going about this is a great conversation.
Great. Thanks so much for that perspective. I actually I'm on a mailing list from the National Association of Realtors, and I might have you to thank for that. So I received a couple of publications during the pandemic that showed up at City Hall, and I received them actually in person when we finally went back to in-person meetings. And I read them cover to cover, and I've since passed them along to Amber. Because again, she's definitely my wingman in this effort, because she is a current planning and zoning member, and also has just recently completed some. I guess Amber, you're explain again what you just did.
I'm pursuing my MPA, so of course, as part of that, I was required to take a policy class, and we had 4 topics we were allowed to choose from for our semester-long project, and I chose inclusionary zoning.
So you have useful skills. I just went pure political science, so I don't.
I have access to academic databases that have articles with studies about how to create density without pricing people out. And actually, turns out that's a really, really difficult thing to do.
Yeah, Webster just tried to do a zoning change just to allow duplexes. And St. Louis Realtors was actually supportive of that effort, but that was overturned by the voters, unfortunately. Yeah. It's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, so we very much have discussed how to avoid the mistakes that Webster made, and kind of start with baby steps. And this is kind of, we figured this was a baby step, and this was hopefully something that will benefit not only the community as it exists right now, but future. So that's kind of where we're at right now. So we are hoping to actually have changes to our zoning, have recommendations to change. What am I trying to say? Get something in writing to put before council. So between now and the next P&Z meeting, Anthony is planning on sort of creating some language around things that that they talked about last week, and then again what we're talking about tonight. So he is hoping to basically get some language back in front of P&Z for the next meeting, which is why we've been invited as a committee to join that next meeting. And then after that, at some point after that, it will hopefully be on a council agenda. So, by the time summer is over, that's really kind of my hope, is that we've got something actually updated in our ordinances. I know we have had in the past several um, homeowners who have asked or, been trying to make modifications either to existing structures or, um, and our ordinances have put up major roadblocks to them. So we're definitely trying to move it along as quickly as we can at this point now. I just love to hearing the input from everybody about, how to do this. My initial thought, just kind of what we've talked about in the past, is that we would continue to use the conditional use permit process through P&Z and of course council. And kind of the way we have our Airbnb, our short-term vacation rental law structured, that I'm thinking that one or the other of the residences, either the primary or the secondary, would still need to be owner occupied. I wouldn't necessarily think that the primary needs to be owner occupied, because again, if someone wants to downsize and move themselves into their unit while renting out the larger house, I think that's kind of the idea of including aging in place in this process, which is another aspect of this that hopefully the community will support. So definitely the article that Charlie that you shared with us really gives a lot of great perspective about pros and cons for how many attached versus detached. I was actually, when I read about, why does it need to be detached? And so, I mean, to me, that's still something that's worth hashing out, is, whether or not, if someone has the space for an attached unit, then why would we prohibit that? So Amber, I don't know if from your conversation at P&Z, if there was something specific about that.
I think there was some question about, again, would that then propel people without going through a permitting process to kind of redefine their primary residence spaces in a way that would sort of by practice make them multifamily. So I think that connects to, I think, a conversation that we on this committee probably want to have about our single family versus multifamily zoning. So this could be an opportunity to kind of add this conversation into that one, or vice versa. I wouldn't say that there was unanimity about it needing to be detached. That was just something that was brought up, and the group sort of felt like in isolation, this ordinance maybe should be about detached units. But we did talk about the opportunity to reform our zoning code to convert single family zoning to be multifamily. So I think there's still a lot of question marks in people's heads about what that could and should look like.
Yeah. The other thing that actually brings up and reminds me of is a conversation that I had flying back from Phoenix this past week. There was a woman, we were talking about housing and zoning and fun things like that. And she actually mentioned that the Shawnee, Kansas, and I don't know if you guys have heard this yet, but Shawnee, Kansas City Council just basically voted to really restrict roommates, and that is due to a new trend called co-living, where apparently you can divide up a single family home and put locks on all the doors, and then you have shared spaces, the kitchen and living areas, and suddenly what was a single family home becomes a multi-unit. So very interesting news articles out there about that right now, so very much I can see the concern, because again, in the greater real estate world, is that is apparently happening in some of these other cities. Charlie, is this something, have you heard about this yet?
I actually haven't. That's the first time I've heard of this. That's
Yeah.
interesting. We've seen lots of places try to define, family units and who can stay in a space for occupancy permits, especially. That's a fight I've seen regularly. But that's a new one. I've not run across that yet.
Yeah, yeah. Check out, so if you just start Googling co-living or Shawnee, Kansas co-living, dozens of articles will pop up right away. Yeah, I was surprised because, it seems on the surface of it, it seems very anti community, very, negative for all the things that we're talking about, creating greater density, creating the fact that Shawnee, Kansas basically outlawed it, is what I'm saying is negative.
You want to have roommates, but you don't trust any of them. It's still
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Well, it's, for those of us old enough to know what boarding houses were, that's kind of, you can see how communities may have in the past have outlawed that, changed their zoning. And so, is that what we're potentially creating by having sort of attached units or this co-living situation? So, yeah, just more food for thought, because yeah, I hadn't even considered that would be a thing where somebody might take a 3 or 4 bedroom house and suddenly, you've got 8 different people living in that space. So,
I'm aware of that happening in the San Francisco Bay Area as a way for Uber drivers to be able to, who live very far away, to be able to stay closer to the city and to the East Bay in order to get work. Otherwise, they're living 3 hours away and commuting back and forth. So people converting their houses to rent individual rooms to people that they don't know was part of what sort of accelerated the ADU conversations in California.
Yeah. And actually, now that you mention it, I'm remembering in my airline days, and I think they still exist, but they're probably, illegally operating, but the crash pads, pilot and flight attendant crash pads, where if you're lucky, you're renting a room, but in some cases you're simply renting a bed in a room. And that's, definitely changing the density there. And that was New York, when TWA moved their flight operations from New York to St. Louis. Several of us had to go there for 8 weeks for training. So we actually lived in a pilot crash pad. So yeah, forgot all about that. We were good neighbors though.
Well, I do think it's something for us to be conscious of. We're not that far from college campuses where something like this might be a reality, between WashU and Webster and Fontbonne.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, my home that I bought back in 2007 used to house 3 UMSL students. That's what it was used for before.
Yeah. We, the proximity of Metro, we certainly, any of our universities, you can get to. So, yeah, that is definitely something that we need to take into consideration. As far as parking, I think you guys are probably well aware that I am a transit / walkability person, so I'm not a fan of requiring additional parking. I think, can potentially be accomplished by the conditional use process, with the recommendations of staff or whatever based on the units themselves. So, but we're a walkable community, and everyone who lives here is within a mile walk of transit. So, so personally don't see a need to require additional parking spaces. But that'll be up to council ultimately, I think, as to how we want to structure the actual ordinance.
Yeah, and I don't think that before the conversation, anyone took the time to look up, because we do have about 12 existing ADUs throughout Maplewood.
Mhm.
There's one right across the street from me. So those were sort of grandfathered in, some of those smaller houses that were built, and then the larger house was built in front, but the smaller house was never torn down. I would expect that there may be some existing language related to those. But again, I haven't had a chance to look, and Anthony didn't mention it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, ironically, we don't actually have, for if someone wants to, one of our neighbors, I mean, actually, Marion Court, 1 block long dead end street. You can only park on one side of the street. And we've got a neighbor that at one point had owned 7 vehicles, I think. So he most certainly could not park all of those vehicles on his own property. And they, regularly sat in the street and take the street parking. So, and there's no ordinances against that. So that's kind of what I'm getting at. So while it's annoying and inconvenient, we don't limit the number of vehicles that someone can own. So. As far as maximum square footage, minimum square footage, I think some of the examples that were in that article definitely give some good advice, good parameters, just in terms of actual lot coverage and things like that. I think, as Amber, as you mentioned earlier, we're fairly limited with our lot sizes to begin with. So, I think it's more about the lot coverage than it would even be minimum or maximum square footage. I mean, if somebody wants to, put a 400 square foot shed in their yard and live in it, then, who are we to stop them? But that's kind of how I feel about it. But I don't know. Anybody else?
I think the sense was too that, again, if we institute too many requirements, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot.
Yeah.
That the conditional use permit process would allow us an opportunity to really look at the proposal in the context of the lot.
I think that makes a lot of sense, because I think some people are going to get creative with this. And I think that's kind of the beauty of it, is it just allows for some flexibility. And so being able to take that and kind of see how that fits into the broader structure, I think that's a really smart approach.
Yeah. And I know we already have requirements from design and review that basically, require, for instance, when we built our garage, I mean, our garage had to go through the design and review process. And so, that process was sort of controlling to an extent the materials that we used, as well as the size and style and all of those things. So I think this would be similar to that, where, we don't necessarily have to identify up front that it has to be a certain material or a certain style. I think if we allow that to go through design and review process, then that's one more check and balance that would apply.
I think one thing we didn't touch on, and I haven't had a chance to read the article, Charlie, that you shared, was around the financing piece of it and what banks are encouraging and discouraging. We certainly wouldn't want to institute anything that people wouldn't be able to get financing for. So do you have a sense of that, or is that something that is kind of case by case?
I have no idea. But I probably know some people that might be able to help find out. So that's definitely something I can follow up on.
Yeah. It is a again, construction loans or home equity line of credit, things like that, I would imagine, those financing options would apply. I know one or more of the cities mentioned in that article actually had low interest rate loans or zero interest rate loans that was mentioned that the city actually provided. So, there may be some opportunity in the future for the city to actually provide some kind of financing. That may be, years down the road, well out of our reach. But certainly for right now, given our current budget. But yeah, it is, for those who can have their financing in place, I think it will. We had talked in a previous meeting, Charlie, one of our committee members had mentioned about, are we going to shoot ourselves in the foot? Is this going to further gentrify by having an ADU will improve your property value to the point where it's just going to continue the vicious cycle? So, and I don't think any of us really knows at this point.
Yeah, I don't know that we have any data in this market to really look at to understand that impact.
I know Ferguson was looking at some ADU legislation, or it hadn't even gotten to legislation yet. I don't know, maybe a year or two ago. But this is a conversation that I've not heard many places in our area. And it's one where I think absolutely to improve property values for that particular property, but I don't know how much that's going to impact nearby properties, because when you go for, your appraisal with whether that's St. Louis County is appraising it with the assessor's office, or an appraisal when you're, looking to get a home loan, they're going to look and say there's an ADU on there, and that's not the same as this over here. So I don't know how much that's going to really have much of an impact on surrounding property values.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. All right, guys. Well, we are about quarter after, and just kind of wanted to, throw it out there. Are we feeling like we've kind of exhausted our conversation topic for tonight, and so we will continue at the next P&Z meeting?
I think it would be helpful for the P&Z commission members to have those articles, the article and were those responses in the other attachment, Sandy, all provided by former Mayor Greenberg in the red?
They
text?
were, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was, and I had forwarded both of those that I sent to you guys. I sent them to Anthony.
Okay.
I meant to copy him and just forgot, so I sent them to him and let him know that that I was definitely going to be attending the next meeting. So
When is the next P&Z meeting? You know,
June.
It's the
6th?
first Monday. Yeah.
Yeah, June 6th,
Okay.
and that's in person at City Hall.
I'll see if I can't get some answers at least to that financing question by then.
That'd be great. Yeah, really appreciate that. And at some point, we are the committee may expand to other members, just because, as you can see tonight, we only have 2 committee members in attendance tonight. So, so Charlie, if you are interested and or available, you would certainly be a welcome addition to this committee as we move forward.
I serve on the human relations one of these, but we've only met once and there were only 2 of us there.
Yes.
I know that feeling.
That's right. That's right. You're on Sarah's committee. Yes. So yeah, so we as a council sort of need to figure out how we're moving forward with these committees. So certainly, if that one's on pause anyway, then then maybe we can move forward with you on this one. So, but I don't want to steal the one person who attends Sarah's meetings.
Well, meeting, it's just singular. We only had one. There's been a lot of doodle polls that have not come up with times.
Yeah. All right. Well, again, thank you both for your attendance tonight and for your commitment to this process and to our city. I greatly appreciate it. So thank you very much. And we will, we'll be in touch about future meetings, kind of once we get into June. We really need to just look at everybody's schedules, summer, and kind of see what's, potential for the summer meetings go. So
I appreciate it. Let me know how I can be a resource.
great. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us. This has been really helpful, and the article as well.
You bet.
Have a good night, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.